When I first agreed to take on this pet sitting job, it seemed like the easiest thing in the world. A quiet house in the countryside, a few well-behaved pets, and nothing but time to myself for a few days. It was perfect, or at least, that's what I thought. The family seemed nice enough, the kind that smiles just enough to feel welcoming, but doesn't linger long enough to seem intrusive. Their instructions were clear: feed the dog twice a day, keep the cat indoors, and lock up every night before dark. Simple, straightforward, nothing unusual. But standing here now, replaying everything that happened in my mind, I can't help but feel a chill run down my spine. Because what seemed so ordinary at first was anything but. And by the end of that first night, I realized I wasn't alone in that house. This wasn't just about watching over someone's pets. This was about survival. What I saw in that house, what I heard, what I felt. I'll never forget it. Would you have made it through the night? This is my story. I remember pulling up to the house late that afternoon. The sun was just starting to set, casting long shadows over the driveway. It wasn't a grand house. Modest, really, with a faded paint job and a front porch that creaked underfoot. The family greeted me warmly at the door, introducing me to the pets. A golden retriever named Max, calm and friendly, and a sleek black cat named Luna, who barely glanced my way before darting upstairs. "She's shy," the father explained with a chuckle, motioning toward Luna's disappearing tail. I smiled politely, thinking nothing of it. We walked through the house as they gave me a tour, pointing out where they kept the pet food, the spare keys, and the emergency contact numbers pinned to the fridge. Everything seemed normal. "Oh, and one last thing," the mother added as she handed me the keys. "Try not to open the back door after dark. Max doesn't like it, and it's better to keep him calm." She said it casually, like she was giving me a tip about overwatering the plants, but something about the way she avoided my eyes when she said it made me pause. "Sure," I replied, brushing it off. After all, what could possibly go wrong in a quiet little house with two pets for company? But now, looking back, I should have asked more questions. I should have paid more attention to the way her hand trembled ever so slightly as she passed me the keys, because that simple instruction, to keep the back door locked after dark, was the beginning of everything. They left shortly after, their car disappearing down the gravel road, leaving me alone in the house. The first hour passed uneventfully. Max followed me from room to room, his tail wagging lazily as I unpacked my things. Luna, true to form, stayed hidden upstairs. The silence was comforting at first, the kind of quiet that feels peaceful. But as the evening wore on, that silence began to shift. It felt heavier somehow, pressing in on me as the sun dipped below the horizon. By the time the sky turned black, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't the house itself. There was nothing inherently strange about it. But there was something in the air, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. And then it happened. The first moment I knew this night wouldn't be like any other. I was in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner, when Max suddenly froze in the doorway. His ears perked up, his body tense, his eyes fixed on the back door. He didn't bark or growl, he just stood there, unmoving, staring. I followed his gaze, expecting to see nothing more than the dark outline of the backyard through the glass. But there was something there, just beyond the porch light's reach. A shape, maybe, or a shadow. I blinked and it was gone. I laughed nervously, brushing it off as my imagination. But Max didn't move. He stayed rooted to the spot, his tail no longer wagging, his eyes unblinking. And that's when I heard it, a soft scratching sound, faint but distinct, coming from the back door. It was subtle, almost too quiet to notice, but in the stillness of the house, it might as well have been thunder. My heart raced as I stepped closer, trying to peer through the glass. But the porch light was too dim, the darkness beyond it impenetrable. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the lock. Max let out a low whine behind me, snapping me out of my trance. I stepped back, my pulse pounding in my ears, and locked the door. I told myself it was nothing, just the wind, or a tree branch. Nothing to worry about. But deep down, I knew better. I should have left the house right then and there, but I didn't, and that was my first mistake. Let me start by saying that pet sitting wasn't exactly my dream job. It was something I did occasionally for extra cash, and over the years, I'd gotten used to all kinds of requests, feeding exotic birds, watching over a snake collection, even house-sitting for a pair of ferrets that had a habit of escaping their cage. But this particular job, it was different from the start. The family had reached out to me through a mutual friend. They were polite, professional even, but there was something about their tone during our first phone call that gave me pause. It wasn't what they said, it was how they said it. The father, Mr. Daniels, spoke quickly, almost too quickly, as if he were eager to get the conversation over with. And the mother, Mrs. Daniels, kept interjecting, reminding him to mention this or that, her voice tight with what I could only describe as nervousness. "The house is in the countryside," Mr. Daniels explained. "Very quiet, very private. We have a dog, Max, and a cat, Luna. They're both friendly and well-behaved. You shouldn't have any trouble with them." Mrs. Daniels chimed in then, her voice softer but strangely urgent. "Just make sure to lock the doors every night. And if you hear anything unusual, don't go outside. It's probably just the wind." I remember laughing awkwardly, unsure how to respond. "Sure," I said, trying to sound confident. "I'll take care of everything." They thanked me profusely and assured me they'd leave detailed instructions on the kitchen counter. I thought nothing more of it at the time. People in the countryside could be overly cautious, right? Maybe they were just protective of their pets. The house was about an hour's drive from town, tucked away at the end of a long, winding dirt road. I remember the first time I saw it, it looked ordinary, not run down or particularly creepy, just old. The kind of house that had probably seen a few generations of family dinners and lazy Sunday afternoons. But there was something about its isolation that made me uneasy. It wasn't the kind of place where you could call for help and expect someone to arrive quickly. When I pulled up, the Daniels were already waiting for me on the porch. They greeted me warmly enough, but there was a tension in their smiles that I couldn't quite ignore. They gave me the usual rundown, where the pet food was stored, how often to walk Max, how Luna liked to hide under the bed when she was nervous. But then, as they handed me the keys, Mrs. Daniels hesitated. "There's one more thing," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you hear scratching at the back door, don't open it." I froze, confused. "Scratching?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Like from Max?" "No," she said quickly, almost too quickly. "Just don't open it. It's nothing to worry about, really." And with that, she stepped back, her smile tight, her eyes darting toward her husband as if to signal him to say something else. But he didn't. He just patted my shoulder, thanked me again, and they left. The house felt too quiet once they were gone. Max followed me around as I explored, his tail wagging lazily, his big brown eyes full of trust. Luna, on the other hand, was nowhere to be seen. I found her eventually, curled up in the corner of the guest bedroom upstairs, her green eyes watching me warily as I walked in. There was nothing particularly unusual about the pets themselves. Max was friendly and affectionate, the kind of dog who seemed happiest just lying at your feet. Luna was the opposite, aloof, skittish, and quick to disappear whenever I got too close. But as I settled in that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that their behavior wasn't just a reflection of their personalities. It was almost as if they knew something I didn't. The house itself was simple. 3 bedrooms, a cozy living room, a kitchen that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. But there were little details that stood out. A scratch on the back of the front door, as if something had clawed at it. A strange stain on the carpet in the hallway upstairs. And the windows? There were thick curtains on every one of them, drawn tightly shut even during the day. It felt less like a home, and more like a place someone was trying to keep the world out of. I tried to push those thoughts aside as I went about my first evening. I fed Max and Luna, double-checked that all the doors were locked, and settled into the couch with a book. For a while, it was peaceful. The kind of quiet I'd always thought I'd enjoy. But as the hours ticked by, that quiet began to feel oppressive, like a weight pressing down on me. And then I heard it, the sound that changed everything. The first day began just like any other pet-sitting job I'd taken. Quiet, uneventful. But looking back now, I realized that it wasn't quiet in the way you might expect from a country house. It wasn't peaceful. It was too quiet, the kind of silence that wraps itself around you, heavy and oppressive, like the house itself was watching. I woke up early that morning, feeling optimistic. The sun poured through the curtains in the guest bedroom, and for a moment, I felt a sense of calm. The pets were waiting for me downstairs, Max wagging his tail enthusiastically, and Luna perched on the windowsill, her eyes following my every move. I fed them, checked the family's instructions on the fridge, and decided to settle into a routine. The chores were straightforward. Feed Max and Luna, water the plants on the front porch, make sure to keep the doors locked at all times. I thought it was odd how much emphasis the instructions placed on locking the doors. But I told myself it was just a precaution. People in the countryside could be overly cautious. It came with the territory, I assumed. The first odd thing I noticed was the smell. It started faint, almost unnoticeable, like damp wood mixed with something metallic. At first I thought it might be the old pipes or the carpeting, but as the day went on it seemed to grow stronger, especially near the back door. I sniffed around like an amateur detective, trying to pinpoint the source, but found nothing. Just the faint trace of that strange, unsettling odor hanging in the air. And then there were the noises. Old houses make sounds, that's a fact. But these noises were different. They didn't feel random. It was as though the creaks and groans followed me, like the house was reacting to my movements. When I walked through the living room, I heard a faint thud upstairs. When I stopped by the kitchen, a light tapping came from the window. Each time I froze, my heart racing, only to find nothing when I turned to look. I tried to laugh it off, but the unease was beginning to settle deep in my chest. By midday, Max's behavior started to change. At first, he was his usual happy self, trotting alongside me as I moved through the house. But by the afternoon, he became distracted. He would stop abruptly, his ears perking up as if he'd heard something. Then he'd stare into empty corners or down the hallway leading to the back door, his body tense, his tail stiff. I tried calling his name, but he wouldn't respond. It wasn't until I physically tapped his shoulder that he seemed to snap out of it. He looked up at me, his big brown eyes filled with something I could only describe as concern. He was trying to tell me something. I could feel it, but I didn't understand. Luna was no better. She stayed upstairs for most of the day, peeking out from under furniture or from behind doorways. But whenever I passed by her, her eyes would fix on me, unblinking, as if she were watching my every move. It wasn't the aloofness you expect from a cat. It was almost deliberate, like she knew something I didn't. By the time evening rolled around, the tension in the house had grown. I tried to relax, settling into the living room with a book, but my focus kept drifting. The house felt different at night, heavier somehow. And then the lights started flickering. It began in the kitchen, a faint, irregular dimming as if the electricity was straining. I walked over to check the light switch, flipping it up and down, but it made no difference. After a few minutes, the flickering stopped on its own, leaving me in uneasy silence. But the shadows were harder to dismiss. Every time I turned my head, I thought I saw movement at the edge of my vision. Just a flicker, there and gone. At first I thought it was my imagination, but it kept happening. A dark shape darting across the hallway, a brief, indistinct form by the window. And every time I looked, there was nothing there. Later that night, while tidying up the guest bedroom, I stumbled upon something I wasn't supposed to find. There was a small wooden box tucked away in the closet, hidden under a pile of old linens. It wasn't locked, and I'll admit I was curious. When I opened it, I found a collection of photographs, old black and white pictures, the kind you'd expect to see in a family album. The first few were harmless enough. Portraits of the house, the family standing on the porch, children playing in the yard. But then the photos started to get strange. In one, the family stood in the living room, posing stiffly for the camera. But in the background, near the window, there was a figure. It was blurry, hard to make out, but it didn't look like anyone I'd seen before. And in the last photo, there was only the house, empty, except for that same figure standing at the edge of the yard, watching. I slammed the box shut and shoved it back into the closet, my hands trembling. I told myself it was nothing, just an old trick of the camera, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever or whatever was in those photos hadn't left. By the time I went to bed, I was more than ready for the day to end. I locked all the doors, double-checked the windows, and climbed under the covers with Max lying at the foot of the bed. For a while, the sound of his breathing was enough to calm me. But then it happened. A loud, jarring bang echoed through the house, so sharp and sudden that I bolted upright. Max was on his feet in an instant, his ears pinned back, a low growl rumbling from his throat. I sat frozen, my heart hammering in my chest, listening for any other sound, but there was only silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, a loose shutter maybe, or something falling over, but deep down, I knew better. Whatever was in this house, it wasn't going to let me ignore it any longer. And as I sat there, clutching the blankets, Max's growl growing louder, I realized that this was only the beginning. When the second day began, I thought I'd feel better. Less on edge after a full night in the house. But when the morning sunlight hit, it only made everything from the night before feel more real. That bang, the open door, and the pet's behavior weren't figments of my imagination. Something wasn't right in that house. And as the hours passed, the sense of unease only grew. I decided to stick to the routine the Daniels had outlined, hoping it would keep me grounded. Max greeted me with his usual enthusiasm, though he seemed more subdued than the day before. Luna was still keeping her distance, though she occasionally slinked through the house, her green eyes darting toward every shadow. After breakfast, I walked through the house to check the locks on all the doors and windows. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been inside the house the night before, but as I moved from room to room, I found nothing out of place. Everything was as it should be, or so it seemed. The back door, the one I was sure I'd locked, was secure now. But that didn't make me feel any better. If it had been locked the night before, how had it opened? I tried to focus on smaller tasks. I watered the plants on the front porch, swept the kitchen floor, and folded a pile of laundry I'd found on the couch. For a while, it worked. The mundane chores kept my mind occupied. But then I started noticing the small things again. It started with the footsteps. I was in the living room, sorting through the stack of books on the coffee table, when I heard it. Slow, deliberate steps coming from the floor above me. My immediate thought was that Luna had knocked something over. But when I called her name, Max perked up, his ears twitching toward the stairs. He let out a low, uneasy whine. "It's just the cat," I said aloud, more to reassure myself than him. But as I listened more closely, I realized the sound was too heavy. It wasn't the quick patter of Luna's paws, it was the steady, rhythmic thud of someone walking. My heart started to race. I stood frozen, staring at the staircase, waiting for the sound to stop. But it didn't. It continued, slow and deliberate, moving from one end of the upstairs hallway to the other. Clutching my phone in one hand and a broom in the other, I climbed the stairs, my breath caught in my throat. The hallway was empty. The doors were all closed, just as I had left them. But the air up there felt different, heavier, colder, as though the house itself was holding its breath. I checked each room, opening doors slowly, half expecting to see someone or something waiting on the other side. But there was nothing. Just silence. And then, just as I was about to head back downstairs, I heard a faint creak behind me. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. I hurried back down the stairs, my heart hammering in my chest. Max's behavior became even more erratic as the day wore on. He started barking at seemingly nothing, his gaze fixed on empty corners or the darkened hallway leading to the back door. Luna was no better. She refused to stay in one place for more than a few minutes, constantly darting from room to room, her tail twitching nervously. At one point, I found her sitting on the windowsill in the guest room, staring intently at something outside. But when I looked, I saw nothing but the empty backyard. "What's wrong, girl?" I asked, but she didn't move. She just kept staring, her body tense, her eyes wide. It was as though she was waiting for something to appear. I tried to distract myself by tidying up, but as I was dusting a bookshelf in the study, I found something strange, a small leather-bound notebook tucked between two old textbooks. It looked ancient, its cover cracked and worn with age. When I opened it, I realized it wasn't a journal or a planner. It was more like a log, pages filled with short, frantic entries written in jagged, uneven handwriting. "They come at night," one entry read. Another said, "The pets see them. They always know." My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. Most of the entries were short, almost incoherent, like the writer had been in a hurry. But one page stood out. The words were scrawled in bold, uneven letters. "Do not let them in. No matter what you hear, do not open the door." I slammed the notebook shut and shoved it back onto the shelf, my chest tight with fear. Was this some kind of joke? A leftover relic from a previous tenant? Or was it something else? Something real? I didn't want to know. I couldn't let myself think about it for too long. I forced myself to leave the study and tried to focus on anything else. By the time night fell, the house felt different again. The oppressive silence from the first night had returned, wrapping itself around me like a suffocating blanket. Max wouldn't leave my side, and Luna stayed hidden under the couch, refusing to come out even when I called her name. I was sitting in the living room, scrolling mindlessly on my phone, when I heard it, a loud crash from the kitchen. It wasn't just a small sound, it was deafening, like something heavy had fallen or been thrown. Max shot up, barking furiously, his tail tucked between his legs. I grabbed the broom again and made my way to the kitchen, my legs trembling with every step. The scene that greeted me made my stomach drop. One of the chairs at the kitchen table had been overturned, and the back door, the same door I had locked and double-checked, was wide open again. The cool night air flooded the room, carrying with it that same metallic, earthy smell I'd noticed the day before. I rushed to the door and slammed it shut, locking it once more. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. Max was barking wildly now, his eyes fixed on the back door. Luna emerged from under the couch, her fur standing on end, her eyes wide with fear. She let out a low, guttural growl, a sound I didn't even know cats could make. They were both terrified, and it was contagious. I backed away from the door, my breath coming in shallow gasps, and tried to calm them down. But deep down, I knew they were trying to warn me. Whatever had opened that door wasn't finished yet. It was still out there, waiting. And it wasn't going to stop. Slow, deliberate, trembling with tension. The night of the second day was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. I've tried to tell myself over and over again that it was just my imagination, that it wasn't real. But deep down, I know the truth. What I saw, what I felt, it's something I'll carry with me forever. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? The open door, the strange notes, the noises upstairs, everything felt like it was building toward something. Max seemed to sense it too. He wouldn't settle, pacing back and forth between me and the back door, his tail stiff, his ears twitching at every sound. Luna stayed perched on the arm of the couch, her eyes darting toward the shadows in the corners of the room. By midnight, the house was silent again. Too silent. It was the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're being watched, like the walls themselves are holding their breath. I told myself I just needed to make it until morning. If I could get through the night, I'd call the Daniels and tell them I couldn't stay another day. But something in the back of my mind told me that morning might not come. It started with the footsteps again. This time, they weren't upstairs, they were in the hallway, just outside the living room. Slow, deliberate, getting closer with every step. Max froze, his body stiff as a board, his growl low and guttural. Luna bolted under the couch, her hiss cutting through the silence like a knife. I grabbed the broom, holding it in front of me like a sword, and crept toward the hallway. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I peered around the corner, expecting to see nothing, but instead I saw a shadow. It wasn't a person, not exactly. It was tall, impossibly tall, its form shifting and flickering like smoke. I blinked, and it was gone. I stumbled back into the living room, my breathing ragged. Max barked furiously, his eyes fixed on the spot where the shadow had been. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the light, but I knew better. Something was in the house with us. Max suddenly bolted toward the stairs, barking like his life depended on it. Luna followed, her yowls echoing through the house. I didn't want to go, but something told me I had to follow them. They knew something I didn't. As I climbed the stairs, every step felt heavier, like the air was pressing down on me. When I reached the top, I saw Max standing in front of the master bedroom door, scratching at it frantically. Luna crouched beside him, her tail puffed up, her eyes wide with fear. I hesitated for a moment, my hand trembling as I reached for the doorknob. The Daniels had told me not to go in there, but at that moment, I didn't care. I pushed the door open, and the smell hit me first. Stale, earthy, and metallic, like the air had been trapped in there for decades. The room was dark, the curtains drawn tightly shut. I fumbled for the light switch, but when I flipped it, nothing happened. My phone's flashlight barely cut through the gloom, but it was enough to see the outlines of the furniture. A large bed, an old dresser, a mirror hanging on the wall. But then my light caught something on the floor. Scratch marks, deep, jagged gouges carved into the wood, leading from the doorway to the middle of the room. And in the center of those marks was something that made my blood run cold. It was a circle, drawn in what looked like dried, rusty stains. Symbols I didn't recognize were scrawled around its edges, their shapes twisting and looping in ways that hurt to look at. I tried to back away, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. My phone's light caught the edge of the mirror on the wall, and that's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was my own reflection, distorted by the dim light. But then I realized the figure in the mirror wasn't moving the way I was. It was standing perfectly still, its head tilted slightly to the side, watching me. I turned to look behind me, but there was nothing there. When I turned back to the mirror, the figure had moved closer. Its face, or what should have been its face, was just a blank, dark void, as though the mirror itself was swallowing it. My breath caught in my throat as it raised a hand and pointed at the floor, at the circle. My mind screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. Every muscle in my body was locked in place, my heart hammering in my chest. Max barked furiously behind me, snapping me out of my trance. I turned and bolted down the stairs, the pets at my heels, the sound of footsteps thundering behind us. I ran toward the front door, fumbling with the lock, but it wouldn't budge. The key twisted uselessly in the lock as Max barked and growled at the shadows gathering in the corners of the room. Luna hissed and clawed at the floor, her cries sharp and panicked. Desperate, I turned and ran toward the basement door, the one place I hadn't dared to explore before. It felt like my only option. The basement stairs creaked under my weight as I descended, the air growing colder with every step. The pets stayed close to me, their fear palpable. At the bottom of the stairs I found another door, heavy, wooden, and covered in deep scratches. With trembling hands I pushed it open. Inside was a small, windowless room. The walls were lined with shelves, each one filled with jars of things I couldn't identify. Bones, feathers, and what looked like dried herbs. In the center of the room was a table, and on it lay another notebook, identical to the one I'd found upstairs. But this one was open, its pages covered in the same frantic handwriting. You've seen them now, they won't let you leave. I froze, every hair on my body standing up. My mind screamed at me to leave, to run, but I couldn't move. My chest felt tight, my breath coming in shallow gasps. And then I heard it, a voice, faint and echoing, coming from behind me. "Why are you here?" I spun around, but the room was empty. The voice came again, louder this time, as though it was coming from the walls themselves. "You shouldn't have come." I knew I couldn't stay in that house a moment longer. Whatever was happening, whatever had taken hold of this place, it wasn't something I could fight or reason with. My only thought was to get out, to grab Max and Luna and run. But the house had other plans. The moment I turned to leave the basement, the lights flickered and went out completely, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, the small beam of light shaking as I tried to orient myself. Max barked frantically, his growls echoing off the cold stone walls, while Luna's sharp, panicked cries cut through the oppressive silence. I sprinted up the stairs, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might stop. Every step felt heavier, as if the house itself was trying to hold me back. When I reached the top, the basement door slammed shut in front of me. I screamed, throwing myself against it, but it wouldn't budge. Behind me I could hear footsteps on the stairs, slow, deliberate, and getting closer. Desperate, I yanked the door handle with all my strength. It gave way suddenly, and I stumbled into the hallway, slamming the door shut behind me. I didn't stop to catch my breath. I grabbed Max by the collar, scooped up Luna, and ran toward the front door. But when I reached it, the lock wouldn't turn. The key was still there, but no matter how hard I twisted, it wouldn't move. I could feel something watching me, pressing in from all sides. The air grew colder, and I swear I heard whispers, soft, indistinct voices coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. My hands shook as I abandoned the front door and ran toward the kitchen. The back door was my only chance. As I reached the kitchen, I froze. The door was already open, swinging slightly in the night breeze. Beyond it, the backyard stretched out in eerie silence, the darkness thick and impenetrable. For a moment I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me not to go out there. But then Max let out a furious bark, his body tense as he stared at something just beyond the doorway. I followed his gaze, and my blood turned to ice. Standing at the edge of the yard was the figure from the mirror. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, its blank, shadowy face tilted slightly to one side as if observing me. My chest tightened, and I felt rooted to the spot, unable to tear my eyes away. And then it started to move. Slowly at first, its form flickering like smoke, but as it got closer, its movements became erratic, jerking and lurching toward the house. Max barked and growled, his fur standing on end, while Luna clawed at my shoulder, hissing and spitting. My body finally reacted, and I slammed the door shut, locking it just as the figure reached the porch. I didn't stop to think. I grabbed the pets and bolted for the living room window, throwing open the curtains. The glass was old, but it gave way under the weight of the heavy chair I hurled at it. The shattering sound was deafening, but I didn't care. I climbed through the jagged opening, pulling Max and Luna with me, the adrenaline drowning out the pain as shards of glass sliced into my hands and legs. I ran. I didn't stop to look back, didn't care about the voices or the shadows I could feel pressing against me. I sprinted down the gravel driveway, Max bounding ahead of me, Luna clinging to my chest. The house loomed behind me, its windows dark and empty, like a watching predator. It wasn't until I reached the edge of the Daniels property that I finally stopped. My legs gave out, and I collapsed onto the side of the road, gasping for breath. Max sat beside me, his body trembling, while Luna burrowed deeper into my arms. I didn't know how long I sat there before the headlights of a passing car lit up the darkness. I waved frantically, and the driver, a kind stranger who didn't ask too many questions, took me into town. The next morning, after bandaging my cuts and calling a friend to come get me, I decided to call the Daniels. I needed answers. Some kind of explanation for what had happened in that house. But when Mrs. Daniels answered the phone, her response sent a chill down my spine. "Oh," she said, her voice calm, almost cheerful. "You must have met her." "Her?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Who are you talking about?" She paused for a moment, and I could hear the smile in her voice when she spoke again. "Don't worry about it. She never hurts anyone. At least, not as long as you follow the rules." I hung up the phone, my hands trembling. Rules? What rules? They had never told me about rules, only vague warnings about locking the doors and staying inside. It was as if they had known all along what was in that house and had sent me there anyway. The thought made my stomach turn. I never went back to the Daniels house. I blocked their number, deleted their contact information, and tried to put the whole experience behind me. But some nights when I'm lying in bed, I can still hear the whispers. Soft, indistinct voices just on the edge of my hearing calling my name. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see it. The figure from the mirror. Its blank face watching me, waiting. I don't know what it wanted, and I don't think I ever will. But one thing is certain, I'll never take another pet-sitting job again. If I'd known what I was walking into, I never would have taken that job. I thought it was just another pet-sitting gig, a few quiet days in a house with some friendly animals. But what I found, it changed the way I see everything. It's been weeks since I left that house, but the memories still haunt me. The footsteps, the figure in the mirror, the whispers, they're burned into my mind. And now, I'll never look at pet-sitting the same way again. I keep thinking about the Daniels, about how calm they sounded when I told them what happened. They knew. They knew what was in that house, and they sent me there anyway. Did they think I wouldn't notice? Or did they just hope I'd follow their vague instructions without asking questions? Either way, they didn't warn me. Not really. And now I can't help but wonder, how many others have they sent there? How many others have walked into that house, thinking it was just another job, only to leave with scars they can't explain? And then there's the pets, Max and Luna. They knew something was wrong. They tried to warn me, to protect me, in their own way. I've always believed animals can sense things we can't, and now I'm sure of it. They saw the thing in the mirror before I did. They knew about the basement, about the voices, about the shadows creeping through that house. And they stayed by my side, even when I didn't deserve it. I think about them often, about how Max barked at the darkness and how Luna clawed at me to keep me moving. I owe them everything. If it weren't for them, I might not have made it out. But even now I wonder, did we truly escape? Or is some part of that house, of whatever lives inside it, still with us? But now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have stayed in that house? Would you have followed the footsteps, opened the basement door, or looked in the mirror? Or would you have run the first chance you got? Have you ever experienced something like this, something you can't explain? If you have, I'd love to hear about it. Let me know in the comments below. And if you're like me, someone who can't resist a good, spine-chilling story, I've got plenty more where this came from. Stories of strange houses, haunted places, and things that defy explanation. So if you're brave enough to keep watching, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps me keep sharing these stories, and who knows, maybe one of your stories will be featured next. Before you go, remember this. Sometimes the things we can't see are the ones we should fear the most. It's easy to dismiss a creaking floorboard, a flickering light, or a strange sound as nothing more than coincidence. But every so often, those small things add up to something much bigger, something much darker. And when that happens, all you can do is hope you'll make it out in one piece. Thank you for watching, and don't forget, stay safe out there, because you never know what might be waiting in the shadows.